Hey, welcome back, Reg viewers. It's been a while. I haven't been around here for a little bit. Where have I been, you're wondering? Well, let's just say I've been away. OK, we've got BPM today, from back office to front office and beyond. I think that's the longest title we've ever had. However, it's pretty entertaining stuff. There's lots of stuff. It's much more entertaining than BPM usually is. I know, I used to do this stuff about 10 years ago. I used to write about this stuff. And the great thing about it was, every year you could write the same feature, 1,200 words explaining what workflow was to people, and then a box out about an insurance company that bought a big scanner. But it's all changed, as you're going to find out. It's not going to be that today. I hope it's not going to be that today. So who's on our Regcast today? Well, the person that you have never seen before in the Reg studio, and he's delighted to be here, perhaps, is Dermot from Kofax. Dermot, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim. It is a pleasure to be here.
Tell me about Kofax.
Sure. And in fact, I expect many of your viewers are already familiar with Kofax as the #1 capture company in the world. We are in 40 countries. We've got 1,200 staff. We've got over 20,000 organizations using our technology. And we really are the #1 brand in that capture market. And that is everything from what people traditionally think of as the old-fashioned, you put it in the scanner, you get the document in an archive, right up to you start to use your mobile phone of any variety, and you take a photograph of your chimney that's fallen off your home, and you upload it through into your insurance company. So capture in multi-format, not just to take the image, but also to extract the information and put it into databases and into business processes. That's what people are familiar with Kofax as. But a couple of years ago, our customers were saying to us, well, we love you for capture, but we use that then in our processes, so don't you do BPM? And in the last year, Kofax has gone out, invested, acquired a leading position in the BPM industry, and so our new proposition is capture-enabled BPM. So we're putting those two things together, and I hope we get to talk a bit more about it today.
We'll give you a little bit of time.
Yeah, and I hope it is a bit interesting.
Oh no!
Let's see.
I assume so. We're not having you
Let's
back.
see.
And I think it's important to point out to everyone today that it is the last day of your sales quarter, isn't it?
It is.
So
if I disappear from the studio, it'll be for that reason.
We'll carry on without you, but that means we can say whatever we like. And the person,
maybe someone will call in and place an order. That would be fine.
That would be extremely foolish.
It would be
based on what we're going to say. Okay. But it doesn't mean you can't do it eventually, eh? Yeah. Now, Dale is with us today. Dale, you all know Dale. Dale, yes, but Deville.
I've got a bit of a reputation, haven't I? Yeah.
I'd say, yeah. So, Dale, this is actually an interest of yours, isn't it? A bit of a hobby on BPM.
Yeah, it is. I mean, back early in my career, I did a lot of sort of process modelling and. Just as part of designing and writing software, you can help but get involved in processes. So I kind of came at it originally through that kind of angle, and then over the years I've got more involved in sort of BPM stuff. I find the whole process thing fascinating because it's it's not just about technology; it's about people, politics, and all sorts of.
Politics in this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's good stuff.
Great, so I have to tell you as well, guys. Remember about the interface. So. Above my head here, you'll see the buttons. The most important one is ask questions. Ask questions. We've got the guys in the studio, and if they don't answer the thing that you're thinking about, and you haven't asked a question, it's your fault. As we always point out, you can download the slides, give us your feedback later. Don't give us your feedback yet because we haven't done it. Concentrate on asking the questions. Now let's crack on this. The basic points of this is that BPM is changing. It's not what it was before, and it might not be what you've been thinking about it as, and because the world is changing around us, and so you need some kind of flexibility. Now, what is that flexibility? Well, Dale's going to tell us about it. So, Dale, what's the past of BPM, I suppose, we're in at the beginning? Give us a sense of the history.
Well, we've got a slide here which says BPM historically, but I think it does represent the current for a lot of people, actually. I put this slide together. We've done a lot of research work around BPM, survey work, and just going out there and looking at what people are doing in the field. So what I've done here is just summarise some of the things that we hear just time and time again around BPM, and it, just to put this into context a little bit, when we talk to people about BPM, they kind of fall into largely three groups. There's the guys who are doing really good, funky stuff at one end, good hardcore, leading edge, progressive, getting on, investing a lot in BPM technology and really getting results. These are kind of guys you see on case studies, and I'm sure, Kofax have got a lot of these in their
case study. Yeah, it's case study stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who are still designing processes on the back of beer mats and or Visio or PowerPoint if they're on a good day.
When we did a Visio thing, we said that was a really good idea to do it. We said it's not there.
Modelling, no.
Now they're not in the studio.
Diagramming and modelling, Tim. We had this discussion before. You weren't listening, obviously.
I wasn't listening. But yeah, so we've got those guys on the other end.
But then there's a bunch of guys in the middle who've had experience with BPM. And let's say that experience has been a bit mixed, So they've quite often got a result they want, but not necessarily in the way they want. It hasn't gone necessarily as well from a sort of ease of making it happen point of view. So we'll pick up some of the reasons why that is as we go through. But what I've got on this slide is basically a lot of stuff that we hear from that middle group. So people generally tell us, BPM's great for automation and predictability and efficiency, which is a big reason for trying to get what was traditionally paper, into electronic form. Compliance and reporting, obviously, once you got it in electronic form, you can do a lot more with it in that context. But BPM projects, quite often people tell us they turn out to be a lot more complex than they first envisaged. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of BPM work has been confined to the back office historically, so it hasn't necessarily connected out into the wider world as such.
Hence our title.
Exactly. So we'll pick up on that.
Is this a history that you recognise?
Yeah, very much so. I think, frankly, the history of BPM has good and bad in it. And the good is that there have been these efficiency gains, chiefly in the back offices, where processes have been defined and they've been standardised and they've been automated, and that's good. And that is the positive side of the history. What I think some people and some of your viewers may have a bit of a bad taste is that it took them longer, it was more expensive, it was just harder to do. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's an appetite because of the successes to keep going at it, but to find an easier, faster way of getting it done.
Is the problem that some people have got like a big lump in their back office somewhere of this stuff, and it doesn't really quite fit who they are anymore, but they have to keep using it because you can't turn it.
And meanwhile, I think people's view of the world and of their organisation and business has changed. So people used to think very much as, we're the company, we've got big systems, people outside we deal with. Uh-huh. Whereas with social, mobile, cloud, all those trends and phones, and the world has really turned inside out. And so the challenge for BPM is to become not just easier to get done and faster, but also it has to extend from this lump of iron in the back office that's kind of expensive, and it has to reach out not just to the front office of your organization, but beyond that to your customers, to your citizens, if you're a government organization. So that's the other side of the new challenge that I see. So there's a good history, but we need to be able to extend the positives of BPM out to a new audience more easily, faster. And
I think a bit of an indictment of what's going on in BPM is the last point on this slide: manual processing of unstructured processes.
To bring this up,
it's still the problem. And interestingly, even when you look at organisations that invest a lot in BPM, when they first got involved in it, they thought, okay, we're going to knock off this project and then maybe this project, and then they might have a roadmap of stuff. Do they ever get as far as that? No, because the first couple quite often have just been a lot more trouble than they anticipated, and so they haven't necessarily gone on to do those subsequent projects. So manual processing is still rife in organisations, even that have invested in BPM.
What I really kind of get a little irritated about when people talk about BPM is they talk about people as though they're some sort of inefficient production engine. They're like a human buffer in the process. We talked about this before, Dale. And I think it undervalues the people in organizations. And what we should be turning BPM into is not a way of squeezing those people out, but of somehow using the skill experience of those people. Because let's face it, dealing with all that manual work, they've learned a lot about what's important to the customer, how the company works. But a large amount of their time is spent in, stuff that can be automated, whether it's the simple capturing of the information throughout a process. You don't really need as many people as we have doing that today. I mean, Kofax has so many ways of capturing intelligently. But also, when those people remain involved in the process, why don't we just give them some intelligent way of being involved? And that's the role of BPM. We can provide those workers who have a great deal of skill with a means of interacting in their daily work and business process in a much more time-efficient and effective manner, rather than just processing inbound documents.
So just briefly on this one, we're not talking about using BPM to replace people here. We're talking about giving the people a different job to do.
I think we may be talking about removing from people the job of capturing documents. That's kind of the stuff that should be done more automatically. And, you know, it always shocks me, having been in this business now for a while, the amount of people time that is still devoted to capturing just documents and to then extracting data from those documents. Those two things, enormous amount of people time, doesn't need to be spent. I don't think that needs to mean that those people don't have work to do then. I think it means people being the biggest asset of any organization. These people, their time is now released and their skill and experience is now available to do something more useful for the customers.
It's interesting and somewhat brave if, it just depends whether or not your company has employed idiots. We're assuming that they're good at their job. Probably not a discussion that we can have now. Certainly not without offending
I think you
the
need
audience.
to think positively of people, and that's how you get the best from them.
I'm a journalist. I can't. I just can't. But yeah, now Dale, tell us about what's the present now and the future as Reg Reader Research shows up.
Well, picking up on the automation point, I do agree with Dermot on the idea that is you want to release people from doing the boring paper pushing stuff, transcription and data entry and that kind of stuff, and get them doing more useful things. But actually, what I don't think we need to what we shouldn't lose sight of is that automation is still important. I mean, we were talking earlier on. I hear a lot of IT vendors who are selling analytics systems and business intelligence saying, the time of automation is gone. We've done all the automation we need to do. Now it's all about just
in their dreams.
Making use of
exactly.
it. I mean, we're beginning with B springs to mind, Tim.
PM.
So automation is still a priority for a lot of people. And I think it's a case of getting that balance. I mean, too much automation can be counterproductive, but not enough, obviously, is totally wasteful. Now, one of the things that's an important part of this whole thing is connecting business processes to people into business processes directly. I mean, this isn't particularly anything new. People have been trying to do this or have been doing it in the ERP space, for instance, and other contexts for quite a while. And the idea is, rather than actually have a piece of paper generated out there in the field and have that sent in, and then someone else sort of picks it up and does this paper pushing we've been talking about, just give them somehow shortcut that and get electronic participation in the business process. So that's a pretty important part of it. And I think so we hear that all the time. I think the other thing is just the technology trends. I mean, this is pretty obvious stuff here. So mobile technology, need we say more? I mean, there's a lot that can be done around that. Interactive web, it's a bit of a cliche. Customers getting a bit more web savvy and so on, but it is actually true. And and it means that the bar kind of shifts in terms of what you allow people to do on your website. And if you get partway through a transaction on the website and then suddenly it says download this PDF and mail this form to me, I mean, that doesn't work very well.
That's, and on specifically how you do these things, I'm not going to ask you about that at the moment, Dermot, because I want you to save that as sort of our big reveal for later on.
Okay.
But we are going to go into a lot of detail about how exactly this can work efficiently. Yeah. So, good. Let's have a look at the trends specifically on the BPM side on these three things. This is really what we're going to be talking about, certainly in the next, say, half an hour or so, isn't it? So we've got these here. Less predictability, scarcity, and what we're talking about, the edge moving, which you've alluded to already. Anything that we want to sort of briefly say about these before we get into it?
I think we've touched on some of these things already. Maybe we should just...
Let's get on with it.
Let's
Absolutely.
get into it.
Let's get into the meat of it.
Let's not be driven by our slides.
Next slide, Tim.
Yeah, exactly. So it's So right, what we need is the case handling process. What's this about? Oh, I suppose this is really what we do, Dermot, isn't it?
Well, just going back to something Dale said, I mean, process automation is important, and it still is.
Yeah.
So the concept that I'd like to talk about today is not that BPM turns into a completely different thing and doesn't do process automation anymore. We still need to do that. And I'm talking more about it extending so that we can extend the automation to things that previously weren't helped by automation. Mm-hmm. Now, this first picture is kind of the traditional way people think of what BPM does. Three guys like us who we might work in an insurance company and we might be the claims people. Mm-hmm. We would get in a room, we'd get a flip chart, we'd draw one of these diagrams, or we might use Visio, a perfectly good tool, just to give us a sense of what this is. And what we'd be doing is kind of deciding amongst ourselves how claims works in our company. And we'd be kind of casting it in stone. And then we'd communicate that out. And maybe the IT people would maybe use a BPM product to lay out that workflow and ensure that it's done the same way all the time. Mm-hmm. So we're automating the process in a prescriptive fashion. That's traditionally how people have thought of it. And then what happens is, there's some guy comes with a claim that doesn't quite fit. So then you have exceptions occurring, and BPM is known as a thing that works pretty well with exceptions. So that's fine. But in these circumstances we talked of earlier, where it's not all about a centralized thing, it's about the customer who might change their mind every 5 seconds. You need this model you've drawn to be something you can kind of sketch, but every day of the week it can be flexed based on the circumstances. So you're moving to a situation where I think BPM now needs to be able to work in a world where exceptions are now the norm. So it almost doesn't make any sense to use the word exception anymore.
Yes.
What you're really doing...
By definition, the exception hardly ever happens.
Yeah. So a more realistic way of thinking about it, and this brings us back to the people involved, is you have people in your organization, and what you want is for them to kind of, in real time, to assemble fragments of process or procedure that are appropriate to the circumstances. So you might call me up and make a complaint to my bank, and I'm going to respond to you based on the circumstances of your complaint, and my response isn't going to always be the same. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, Dale might call in an hour and make a complaint. By the end of the day, I've dealt with both of your complaints. We'd call it a complaint process, but case by case, it's actually, if you looked at it afterwards and tried to draw it out, it'd be a different process. Yeah. So that's the new BPM. It's about managing that unpredictability. So we can't sit down in a room, define the complaints process, and execute it the same all the time. Well, in fact, I think we all know some companies do that, and we're all annoyed to call them up because we get the same response. They're not really responding. They're subjecting us to a routine process. And what you really want is for the company to be actually flexible and adaptable in responding to you. And I would say that's kind of the new frontier of BPM. We still need process automation, but we need to extend BPM to deal with those more unpredictable circumstances.
So again, I do think we need to keep it in perspective. So I think there's a difference between saying we need to build these things in such a way that exception handling is a natural part of the process, and you want to help with exception handling. But that's not to say that we don't want to manage as much as we can through a more structured, predictable process. But we shouldn't sort of suddenly put our arms in the air and start going all wobbly when something exception hand. We should expect that, and we should try and help with that.
I'm interested in where you sort of draw the line on it. But by the way, Martin sort of sent a message in. Good thing to say. He completely agrees with what you're saying about the value of people. So I mean, I was only joking, really. And I completely agree with what you're saying about that sort of crazy thing where you know that the person who's on the phone understands what you're talking about, but they're constrained by their process to do the thing that the computer tells them to do, which doesn't help you. But some people will be watching this and thinking, he's just saying that anything goes. There actually isn't a process anymore.
I mean, can I put it a different way, though? Because if you turn it on its head and look at it from a customer point of view, most people can relate to a situation where you call in, you're talking to an agent of some kind, and you're trying to get something done, but it's unusual. It doesn't fit with the process. And usually you're in a situation where either you kind of fall in line with whatever the agent's telling you is the way it can be done, or you're in this stupid escalation process because it's one extreme to the other. It's now you have to get into a discretionary decision by a senior manager made totally outside of the normal process handling environment. And I think it's getting away from those two extremes because we all know how painful is that. Supervisor will call you back within an hour, and then 4 hours later you call them again and say, where's the bloody supervisor? And
they've gone home, haven't they? Yeah, because he didn't want to call you back.
But there is a middle ground, I think, is what we're saying, isn't it? We should
What's in this middle ground? That's what I'm thinking.
Well, here's an example for you. I mean, we've all been in situations where we've been, unfortunately they're rare, but where we're surprised by someone who isn't a supervisor appearing to have the discretion to do something. Like you're in a hotel and the person says, I'd be pleased to upgrade your room, or let me send you a bottle of champagne, or something, and you think, wow. So that is a policy choice of the organisation within they work to push the discretion down to the individual person who's actually at the front line dealing with what is your most important asset, which is your customer. And I think the new frontier BPM is how do you automate processes, how do you put structure in them, but also add at a level appropriate for your organisation that you decide on. How do you add a level of discretion and give it out to the field-facing person? I think that's the new frontier.
The problem about this, though, Dale, is that this isn't an IT problem. This is a management thing. How much do we give people the authority to do this?
Well, it's both, actually, because and it's kind of chicken and egg, really, because if you don't have a mechanism to deal with these exceptions elegantly from an IT systems point of view, then obviously you have to rely on a very manual escalation process, typically, and that's where the people thing comes in.
I absolutely agree. I think it is a policy thing, yes, it is. So it is a policy thing, but it is an IT thing. And I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's some things that haven't been great about the history of BPM. People will call it the big iron history. And the very inflexibility of IT systems has itself been a constraint. So if you were a person running one of those organizations and you wanted to give discretion to a wider population of your employees, it was very hard to do. When on the one hand you're trying to instill some kind of policy compliance, service level agreements in a kind of a top-down way, IT didn't have the ability to enable the front line with some flexibility while at the same time enforcing some guardrails. Sometimes that's a concept that's useful. You set some guardrails, but then you let people have flexibility within them. That's the expanded concept of BPM I'm talking of.
It's kind of what you're saying with this quote that you've pulled out here, Dermot, the idea that we've got to be ready to look and recognise when the time has come to make this change, rather than waiting until the systems are so intolerable.
Yes.
That you're pushed into it.
Yes. And I think everyone can just step back and look outside their four walls at what's happened in the world in the last 5-10 years, see which organisations have thrived, which ones have suffered, and they'll see that the ones that have thrived, and this is your slide here, are those who have embraced the challenge of becoming more adaptable. So it's almost like an evolutionary argument, that those who can change will thrive. And some of the old-fashioned concepts of process automation are almost like constraining your evolution, not enabling it. It's like a straitjacket approach. But this is a Harvard Business Review article that I came across, which I thought was really interesting because it in the first place, it shows us that this kind of discussion about the need for adaptability, including adaptability in business process, is a topic of conversation at the executive level, the guys who read the Harvard Business Review. So in the boardroom, the executive committee, they're talking about how can we turn ourselves into a more flexible, agile organization? How can we capture that agility? And I think that is an opportunity for business process management to reintroduce itself as a means for that organization to achieve that agility, because you can't be flexible if your business processes are cast in stone.
Do these guys have the heft within the organisation, Dale?
Well,
I mean, maybe you might want to tell us that.
Can I just pick up on what Dermot's just said? Because I think Harvard Business Review, it sounds very grand, very sort of management consultancy type stuff. We did a good old fashioned Freeform dynamic study, interviewing a bunch of senior managers around Europe, business managers, not IT guys, on business change. And just to reinforce what Dermot was saying, I mean, any of the guys out there who've seen our research, we do a lot of slicing and dicing and look for correlations between things. Huge correlation between organisations who put what we were terming a sort of change-friendly infrastructure in place. So, interestingly, we looked at big transformational change. You go through a big upheaval and you move the company kicking and screaming from one state to another state. If you look at organisations that do that constantly, they are not the best performing organisations. The best performing organisations, and you can take any kind of metrics to look at what you mean by performance, but they are the ones that actually have a combination of an IT infrastructure and a management culture that supports continuous change on an ongoing basis. So you're into kind of ongoing optimization as opposed to big chunky change to fix things that you've left too long. The other thing, let me mention one other thing, which again sort of speaks to something Dermot said. Another big correlation that came out was people who push authority down, in a sensible way, not just sort of willy-nilly let everyone do anything in an anarchistic manner, but people who delegate and empower, and you can use all the clever words you want, but just let people do what's sensible to do at the edge of the business. There's a big correlation between progressive businesses that have good indicators of success, and actually empower their employees. So it all comes back. I mean, you can look at it any way, whether it's Harvard Business Review or whether it's hard data.
I like your study. I don't say that. Yeah, I think I like yours.
It's really, really important, this idea of change readiness.
But here's the thing. I'm going back to your point too here on this to say resources are scarce to be able to do this. This all sounds like a lot of work. And the guys also, they have a big long list of things that need changing. What gets this onto page one of the things that need changing?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's you can easily sound like you're contradicting yourself when you say IT is a really critical part of the process. Well, and that's not to say that people aren't a critical part of the process. Of course they are. And the thing about BPM projects, a bit like ERP projects and other big sort of business centric stuff, is that you need business people involved. A BPM project doesn't work unless business people are involved, and that can be quite a...
We've got Peter in Australia. What time is it in Australia? That's dedication. Peter's asking, basically, who owns this? Who owns BPM? Is it IT department? Is it management? Who are the people in charge?
I'll give you a view. I'd be interested in Dermot's view as well, because we haven't actually discussed this, but it needs to be done collaboratively. I don't think there's any question of that, but I think the ultimate responsibility has to be a business stakeholder. I don't know what's your view.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between who should own it and who in practice seems to own it.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
I agree that who should own it, it should be driven and sponsored from the business side. My experience going in and out of organizations every day who are doing BPM is that it tends to be a mix. And there's an involvement of business and there's an involvement of IT, and they're involved right from the early consideration of whether to do it or not, and then right into the actual doing of BPM and the implementing of some product or solution. And I guess, just to say it in a coarse-grained way, I'd say the more successful real-life implementations of BPM I've seen are actually owned and sponsored and bought into and stuck with by the business side, because they set the priorities and they're prepared to reset them, because they tend to work.
Well, here's the thing: if you're talking about this agility and this flexibility, that's a business decision ultimately to be able to give that power to people, and so there has to be some involvement there. Do you find yourself getting pushed away from those people? Do you get enough time with the business people?
I think that depends directly on how easily they feel they can deal with you. So a business person, when they're dealing with anyone who has any sort of IT smell about them at all, is going to say, no, go and talk to my IT guy. As soon as you start using some jargon they don't get, as soon as you start showing them a screen and saying it's easy to use and yet they don't even understand what it's saying to them.
Yeah.
So if you're truly engaging them in their language, if you're not trying to tell them to talk IT to you, that'll succeed. If also you're showing them how they can use and interact with BPM in a way that they embrace and they go, wow, I'm intrigued by that, I'm going to start doing it, then you'll succeed. But if you approach them and what you're really trying to do is tell them you need to become a bit more IT minded and then you'll get BPM, that doesn't really work.
Yeah. So I mean that goes as well for the internal IT guys in there. Now can we say to the business, also a question that's come in, can we say that chasing this agility and flexibility is going to save them money? Can we make that link?
Oh, I think we can, sure. And I think there's 2 time frames on that. Right. So traditionally BPM has plenty of case studies, and Dale, you can probably talk to it, of saving people money. And that tends to be, this first project saves you money and the next one saves you money. And that's the first time frame I'm talking about. It will save you money. The second time frame in which it saves you money is by enabling you to change. It helps you just by being a more flexible organization. You're going to be more adaptable to your marketplace, to your citizens' demands, to your whatever your business goals are. So you're going to survive and thrive better. So that's going to make you more money. I guess I'd just like to say, at the top of the show here, we said it's the longest title ever, and we said it's front office to back office. I think BPM is no longer just about saving you money. It's not only about the bottom line. It's about the other things we need to do. It's about making you money. It's about extending the depth of your customer relationship. So why isn't BPM talked more about as a kind of system of engagement with your customers? It's really a way of engaging them. It can make you money. It can consolidate and strengthen your customer relationships. It can have so many impacts in addition to cost cutting, which is the traditional number one benefit of process automation.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we start with it, isn't it? Yeah.
Can I just say something on this? Because, we've been doing a lot of work on this recently, and it has changed over the last couple of years, this thing about focus on cost. As we went into the downturn, everything became very cost-focused. We're coming out of that now. The research we're doing at the moment is showing that business execs, the purse string holders, are interested in 3 things from IT. Cost and efficiency is an important one. It continues to be, obviously. But actually, what comes above that most frequently is flexibility, getting IT off the critical path. When we want to do something to take the business forward, and we know why we're doing it, we know we want to do that to increase the top line or go into a new market or whatever. IT is normally the one that sits there and says, well, actually, that's going to take us 3 months to do that. And that's the piece that people are most sensitive to at the moment. The third area, just not necessarily to do with this, that comes up time and time again, is service levels. So basically, if a system is in place, it might be doing what it does, but does it perform? Is it up often enough to actually do something useful with? So uptime, downtime, performance, and those kind of things are important. But those 3 things are really important. So that responsiveness to change is huge in exec minds.
But we're moving to a different sort of measurement, aren't we? Because if you've got these traditional big Iron BPM systems that we're down on today, we don't like them. The good thing about those is when it comes to measuring them, you can say that they can scan this many documents a minute, which goes into this, and they're up for this, and they're working for 24 hours, and they're doing this. And all those measurements that were put in place and what they were sold they were sold on the basis of those, are still in place and they're still functioning. They're not functioning for the business in the same way as they were, but you can make a case that says it's doing what it said it would do. And that sometimes gets in the way of change, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know, but I mean, we've had this conversation lots of times before on these things, on project management and other areas. The thing is, gone, I think, are the days when you decide what a system should do, and then you take a year to deliver it, and you then say, well, it's doing what we said it would do, therefore everything's fine, because the world isn't. As Dermot was saying,
really.
the world is not
we
static.
joked at the start that today happens to be the end of a quarter. And there are many, many of your reviewers who work in companies where they themselves or their management or others are measured on a quarterly basis. That means they think in quarterly bases. And what they'd really like is the ability to decide they want something changed and they want it to be in effect in the next quarter at the outside. Faster if possible. 4 weeks, 6 weeks away, not 18 months away.
Yeah.
So I think this move to faster, lighter weight BPM, as opposed to the big iron, is driven fundamentally from the business side by the need to change to aggressively adapt in short time frames and to do it profitably.
And if anyone, I hear this times. I was at a gathering of ERP. It's different to BPM, but it's the same principle. And the topic of this gathering was, why the hell is optimizing your platform important? And I was making the point that there's nothing wrong with those systems when you put them in, but a lot of them haven't fundamentally changed for 10 years, and the world has moved on. And if you implement a system today and come back in 3 years' time, whereas today it's ticking all the boxes, in 3 years' time it won't be anymore, because
what an interesting point about ERP. This may surprise, but we have people coming to us asking us, we've got our ERP and we're thinking of going to the next version, but we're thinking instead of moving off it and basing our new ERP processes on a BPM platform.
Really?
And the reason they're doing that is because, at least in those cases, the ERP platform on which they're currently working precisely does not have the kind of inbuilt flexibility, the DNA of change and adaptability that by default is in a BPM platform.
Can you integrate with the ERP? Can you put a sort of like it's like putting a sort of a moustache on the ERP?
Absolutely.
Problem.
Well, the practical conversations are people go like, I'd love to get rid of my ERP today,
but I'm not going to do it.
I'm not going to do it. And they say, could you maybe put a wrapper around it of BPM so that we can keep the inflexible ERP, which frankly does a good job of process automation of things that matter to us.
Yeah.
But can we add a layer of adaptability? And I can tell you that in the market today, BPM is making advance in gaining what would otherwise be ERP territory.
I would corroborate
BPM
that, Tim, because the thing about ERP systems is they've kind of crept in terms of scope over the years, and are doing things now that they wouldn't, they're not necessarily natural for. And so, you might call it an ERP system, but actually it's picked up a lot of extra stuff around the edges. And that's not necessarily good or bad depending on your requirements, but, there are a lot of situations where, I'd argue that probably replacing the whole of your ERP with BPM is
frankly,
it's
important for me to be very direct with the customers, and they need to make practical choices that'll work for them. So when that question comes up, I answer as I've done, which is, I would seriously question that you should put your ERP in the bin next year. But if flexibility in it is your challenge, then by all means, I'd encourage you to consider the feasibility of adding some componentry around it, or on the outside of it, or beside it.
Give me a specific about what that wrapper might look like then.
Well, people around their ERP, they want a process that joins front to back process. Like let's say there's a process that runs from the front office to the back office, and their ERP is principally dealing with the back office elements. They can either custom code their ERP to put some additional feature function that a front office person can use, or they can take their CRM at the front office and try and plug that in. So you've got two systems that are not built for this purpose, kind of doing a cross-functional process. The alternative is to meet your front office need with some BPM built functionality, and then to integrate that into the back end of your ERP. So you've extended your capability, but you've done it by plugging into ERP with a flexible process platform that can deal with that.
So customer service is a good example. You might think of customer service as traditionally a CRM type function, but actually ERP has traditionally had an element of customer service for a while, and a lot of organisations have gone with that and then just sort of extended it and built around it. But when you think about the way customer service is going with self-service and lots of different communication mechanisms, all the mobile stuff we talked about earlier on, web, it's not the right platform necessarily to deal with all of that complexity and that rapid change.
I see you put up our next slide here. I think it's relevant to this discussion because you could think of ERP or the traditional use of BPM as being on the left-hand side of a spectrum of process use. So the left-hand side is you're doing standard process automation. You know what the process is. Your whole thinking about it is it's about command and control. Define it, implement it, make sure it's followed. That's the command and control approach of BPM. And that's really the territory that ERP works in as well. Mm-hmm. But if you move to the right on this picture, we've got a spectrum of process types where the processes at the front, which might be your customer-facing processes, tend to need to be more responsive. You can't deal with every customer in the same way. And those require a different kind of thinking. I tend to call it the sense and respond thinking. That's a little bit different than the command and control thinking. Mm-hmm. And if you've got an ERP and what you want to do is enhance it from being only command and control to being also having an element of sense and respond, you might use the BPM platform there for that. Or you could simply use BPM itself to address the entire spectrum of processes, some of which are command and control type, some of which are sense and respond. And so I think, in fact, most processes are a mix. Yeah, so let's say it's a new account opening in a bank. Yeah. Some of it has to be done exactly the same way all the time.
Well, you have legislative reasons to do that.
You have legislative reasons, but then you might want to be a little bit adaptable in terms of the fees. What if you were in a bank and you were able to offer me a certain amount of flexibility in the fee structure, depending on which account options I choose? That's kind of hard for banks to do now, which is why there's not a lot of that on offer. Mm. There's a little bit, but it's very hard for them to do. If they had a new account opening structure that allowed them to offer a range of options and to then implement that and make it work for them and the bank as well as for the customer, that would be a much better account opening process.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of banks might wish they had this at the moment. There are probably a lot of people thinking, I'd love to change banks. But you have this. How much hard work is there to create the interfaces between the systems? Because we're potentially talking about joining 3 different systems together. You in the middle, you've got your CRM, you've got your ERP. Whichever mix you have, there's a lot of work in making sure that documents are passed or processes are continued.
I mean, the good news is that all of those things we've mentioned have moved on quite a bit. Yeah. So, I think it would be unfair to give the impression that ERP is still the old rigid monolithic stuff that we used to know 15 years ago. ERP systems have moved on. That said, though, I mean, there are some things, as ERP vendors have broadened their scope, that they're doing which are not necessarily a natural extension. So there's a lot of grey areas, I think, and what Dermot's, I think, quite rightly saying is you need to kind of stand back and say, well, what kind of blend of solutions should I have? Some of the stuff we've done with the register audience before in terms of research around BPM has shown that actually they have traditionally used BPM quite often to fill in the gaps between packaged applications. So, it has been used to kind of bridge between CRM and ERP and other.
Are you relaxed about that, Dermot? Being a filler-inner?
No. I think there is a big need for integration across those things. But it's not just about the technology. The technical plugging of things together has become a lot more straightforward. It's taken maybe 15 years now for the concepts of open architectures to become a bit more pervasive. But it's
Standards.
more or less is there now. So you do still come across, but it's increasingly rare, in-house applications that aren't open. And so the pluggability of components in anyone's IT infrastructure is very high at the moment, and it's only going to become more so. Mm-hmm. What I find interesting is just with the rise of cloud computing, it's about plugging into other people's, not your own systems, right? And I think we're seeing a trend there that's really pushing the edge, if you like, of business process, so that it's not about your internal piece of the process. It's about going not just to the front office, but going beyond that and outside your own four walls. So the edge of your business process now is about your customers themselves.
Now it's, so this is the time to get into this, isn't it? And so this is as I understand, this is very important to how you see the evolution.
I think it is. We talked earlier about the constraints of applicability of BPM, but I think those are very quickly evaporating. I think if you just forget BPM for a moment and you just think about how each and every one of us are using technology, and it's not just, it's the web, it's cloud computing, it's social technology, and it's mobile technology. All those trends together mean that in the last 5 years, our expectations and assumptions about what's feasible are radically different. So I introduced Kofax as capture, and people used to think that's a huge hunk of iron in the back of some back office in the way back where very few people ever go. But what's happened now is that the capture world itself has moved in parallel with the cloud and mobile revolutions, so that you can now, let's say you're making that insurance claim, you don't have to go outside your own home to do it. You can go to your back bedroom where you have a multifunction printer. You can put your proof of ID on there. You can press a button and it will automatically be captured into the medical claims process, because there's an app on your multifunction printer that allows that to happen. So the age of capturing information has extended. So the universe of applicability of business processes has extended beyond the medical claims company into the homes of all of the people who are their customers. And it extends into the streets as well. Yeah. It can be literally on these kinds of devices too.
Well, people are very comfortable with taking pictures and sending them.
Yeah.
And I could see how that would work. There's two things in this. There's, first of all, how many organisations that you deal with are ready to extend this boundary out there? Mm-hmm. And secondly, technologically, is there anything that we bump up against when you're talking about the quality of the capture, how we know that it's being captured, it's the correct thing that's being captured?
And again, I would have two answers to that. 100% of the people I meet have a huge appetite for extending it, so they'd like, as soon as possible is always the answer. The second answer is, but is that possible? Is that feasible? Can you really get the fidelity of capturing? Can I really, on my multifunction printer, which, between us is a bit of a cheap one, it cost me 50 quid, and will it really do the job? And the truth is that the fidelity can be captured, and I think we have a picture somewhere of where using, it can be an iPhone, it can be a BlackBerry, it can be a Windows phone, it can be a tablet from whatever manufacturer, if they're allowed to sell it to you. And what this next slide picture is showing is that, and sorry, this is a slight Kofax commercial, really. We can capture an image, we can plug it then into capture and transformation technology, so that we're not only collapsing the time and effort it takes to understand what that document is, but also to extract all the information off it and to plug that into a business process in an intelligent way. That absolutely is feasible, and it's what you're seeing on the screen now is a real-life example of a product that we're selling in the market today, and it's our fastest growing thing, really, it and our BPM product together. The capture, the mobile capture, and the BPM are really hot at the moment, and it's because we're able to demonstrate to people in their in their conference room, in their meeting room, that this is actually feasible. So we meet the 100% appetite, and we're then able to overcome the natural first doubts about feasibility because we can actually show it to people and it really works.
So what's the hot button on this? Are people saying it makes claims sort of faster or more accurate, or I suppose cheaper again?
Yes,
what
yes,
are people
and yes.
responding to?
Above,
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
yes,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to put this into context, a lot of people are investing in other ways to solve the problem. For instance, building mobile apps so that they can capture things directly in electronic forms and or allowing users to transact directly on a website. So there's lots of activity going on to directly to get very, very close to the information generation, the point of origination of the transaction. I think the reality of the world, though, and why this is quite interesting, is there's still a lot of paper around, and paper has to be around because some things need it for regulatory reasons. Other things, it's just practicality. But what you want to try and get to is a point where you're capturing that paper as close to the point of origin as possible and extracting as much as possible. So just to reiterate, I think one of the things that I learned from talking to Dermot over the last few weeks, because I was a bit of a skeptic when you first described it, but literally being able to scan a document, and we're all used to scanning and chucking the image into an archive for compliance purposes, but actually extracting the information and plugging it straight into a workflow engine that does triage and routing. I mean, that's a lot of people I've spoken to in the interim actually have said, "Can you do that?" And
that's why we decided in discussing in preparing for today that we'd actually put a slide that kind of showed it,
so because it's actually possible. Yeah,
because people, they hear somebody talking and they say, "Well, I'm not sure I'll believe that." So we're trying to show it. I just wanted to pick up on your point there. I think you have the perfect phrase for it. It's we're extending the number of points of origination at which we can capture these documents and information. So it can, if you follow my argument about going outside of the four walls and into the street and into the home of every customer, we're now able to make all of those places a point of origination at which we can capture any kind of document and extract data and collapse the entire time that previously would have had us filling out a paper form, putting it in an envelope, getting a stamp, which we happen not to have in the home and have to go on Saturday and buy. So it takes 3 weeks to get into the company in the first place. We've turned it into 5 seconds. And we've also collapsed the time it takes to then look at the document, decide that those are the 10 pieces of data on there that are relevant and that we need before we can process the claim. We're also doing that in the same 10 seconds. We're able to do it in the same 10 seconds. So we're saving the first 3 weeks of just getting the document in, and we're saving then the buffer time of human looking and deciding, and is that what I need to do, and where's that data going to go? That might take 3 days. We're putting that down to a couple of seconds as well. So there's a huge time saving. There's an effort saving. Inside your four walls, you're releasing the time of that valuable human resource to do something, I'm sure, very valuable for the company as well. But just lastly, you talked about there's still paper. Of course there's still paper, and we're not saying the paper doesn't still need to be sent in for compliance purposes, but I think there's been a bit of a fallacy in the world, which is that you can't really separate the transmission of physically required paper from the capturing of the information
so nothing happens
and the process.
until the paper comes in, but you could get the thing started.
You only need the paper for compliance, which it has to be in an archive for 7 years, and it doesn't really matter if you don't get the physical paper for 4 weeks. Yeah. You could actually have the claim accepted, adjudicated, and paid in 3 minutes. Yeah. It doesn't have to take 3 or 4 weeks, and that is a huge benefit to a company.
There's a couple of questions here. We're looking at the flexibility point of view. From does this become something that's more practical now for smaller businesses that previously the big iron would just swallow the business? And secondly, on a departmental basis, can we use this for sort of bits and pieces applications rather than the whole way the company works?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, let me just say. In the first place, the antidote to the old-fashioned big iron BPM is the new type of BPM that's faster and more flexible to adopt, including, by the way, the fact that all technology, including BPM, is moving to a cloud-based model with all of the adoption patterns that are going to be coming with that. And secondly, to your point about can you do something small with it, a little departmental thing, rather than a huge thing, absolutely you can. And I would say, in fact, my experience predominantly is that the real adoption pattern of BPM typically is that people choose a small thing to do with it first. A pilot project, a small piece of business process that they know they've wanted to resolve for some time, but they haven't been able to get it to the top of their project list because it was probably going to be hard and expensive to do. Might be absolutely highly valuable to the organization if they were able to resolve it. So these aren't tiny, of no consequence, these little projects. They're of high value, but the simple cost of addressing them seemed disproportionate. And now you can actually do that. But the pattern is do a project on something first.
There's a technology angle to this. I'm just going to mention one thing which I think is quite interesting, actually, in terms of a different way of looking at it. People out there, when you mention the word cloud, you'll get mixed reactions. Some people think it's great. Some people are a little bit skeptical about it. The one thing that cloud has done in the application space in particular is it has changed mindsets. Because, and interestingly, we've done a lot of work around packaged applications in general, and people tell us that whereas previously they would err on the side of bespoking stuff, today, and I think cloud has had a big part of that, they would err on the side of actually taking a more flexible starting point as a package, which by definition most packages are today, and actually make sure that they get a good fit and take more of a kind of 80-20 rule. So don't bespoke the hell out of things and set in concrete a bunch of ways of working that probably aren't necessarily either best practice or going to be relevant in a year's time, 2 years' time. So
yeah, it's a good thing. Which brings us actually really to our final thoughts, because we're more or less out of time. Off these final thoughts, if there's one thing that people should be going away and doing now, a thing that they could do rather than sort of think about, is there something that you would that you pull out just briefly on that one, Dermot?
I would say, firstly, realise that BPM is much more applicable than you used to think, that the reach of BPM is now much more extensible than you think to unpredictable patterns as well as to your front office and beyond. And lastly, that the reach of capture and the reach of BPM are both now very extended. So there's a kind of a new universe of business issues and challenges that you can address today, and they are actually addressable. So rethink.
You might be able to find those nuggety problems. Dale, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, just say it in a slightly different way. I think it's just appreciating that the lines have shifted. So some business problems that you could kind of put to one side a little bit a few years ago, you can't really get away with anymore. Yeah. But at the same time, the lines have shifted in terms of the technology has become a lot more accessible and easier to implement. You put those two together, actually you can revisit some decisions you made in the past and maybe apply BPM, as you were saying, to some different...
Yeah, the key thing for me, I just keep coming back to this idea of engaging with the people that you're meant to engage with more effectively. So that person doing the claim, capturing the documents, running the processes through capture-enabled BPM. It's a much more advanced, quickly applicable system of engagement with your customers than it used to be. And I would hate people to miss the opportunity because they might have stubbed their toe on an earlier BPM.
I haven't realised BPM's got more interesting. Yeah.
Has it? Now let us ask you. You asked that at the start.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not a person to judge these things by because I don't have a checkbook. No one gives me control of one anyway. But yeah, I mean, it is, the one thing I always like about some of these regcasts is that we do end up doing something where when you see the title you think, I wonder if there's anything new in that, and then you find out that there is. So, so thanks for that, basically. Dermot and Dale, thank you very much. Thank you, guys, for watching with us today. Hope we sorted out the things that you wanted. Thanks for the questions. Afterwards, give us your feedback on what we've done. If there's anything that you would like us to do, tell us about it, and then we can do it for you. But from the Reg studio here, I've been delighted to be back, and I hope they'll have me again soon. I've been Tim Phillips, and from Dermot and Dale, goodbye.